Please stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to Monorail Monday. This week we are going to be talking a little bit about Universal and what it was like opening day, the very early days. I didn't start working there until 93, 94, but that's still really early in Universal Orlando's history. There was a lot of problems initially, but they really grew the park and turned it into a pretty amazing place it is today. We're going to talk about the earliest days, opening, and get right into it. So, of course, I've shown you before, if you watched Monorail Monday before, some of the stuff from the scrapbook and things. We got quite a bit of new stuff we'll share here with you, and they just were talking about a lot of previews of what the park was like, what it was going to be, what you could expect to find there. They're really hyping that the park was going to have 12 attractions initially, which wasn't a lot for a theme park to open with, but it was way more than what Disney-MGM Studios had. I think they opened with only about 6 attractions. Of those attractions, you were looking at about 4 big rides, which was going to be Confrontation, Jaws, Earthquake, and of course E.T. would also be opening. Back to the Future ride was not actually slated to open until sometime in 1991. Universal Orlando itself finally opened in June 7 to 1990, and it was scheduled to open in May 1st, but with delays it just didn't open in time. Part of that was a couple of these big rides just were not working. So these Universal previews showed a lot what you could expect. Some of the rides, some of the shows like the Ghostbusters show, Murder, She Wrote, the Hitchcock show, and those were all very interesting. Those are really fun and interesting looks at how production is done for a theme park. I missed some of those, but and a lot of people miss their counterparts at Disney-MGM Studios. If you missed the studio tour from the 2000s, the studio tour is a shadow of what it was originally. It was so much bigger and so much better originally. When they shut down the 2000s version of Disney-MGM Studios, I didn't even care anymore because it wasn't really very much like it started with at all. But back to Universal, so there's lots of stuff they were previewing. One of the things that debuted with the park but didn't last all that long. I think it probably lasted into 93-ish. I think by 94 they shut it down. The production and studio tour, which originally would have been just like the Hollywood studio tour, but Disney beat Universal to the punch in building a studio park, and they copied Universal's studio tour with the tram. So Universal did not want to make it look like they were copying Disney when in fact Disney had copied them. So ultimately Universal did put in a tram tour, but it was more like touring inside the theme park. They went through some of the different themed areas and sets inside the park and talked about how sets were done, facades, production, and things like that. So you would see these trams go by inside the park along the walkways. When I was hired for Jaws, a friend of mine was hired for the tram tour. And so I'd see her periodically going through the park with a tram tour. And that was, gosh, I think I only rode it once, maybe twice, the tram tour, which was going on inside the park. It was pretty interesting. It was nothing like the original Universal tour at all. It was a shorter tour, but it was interesting. It was a little bit different. You're riding inside the park and just pointing out some interesting things. Imagine if when you took the streetcar down Main Street at Disney, if they were talking about and pointing out some of the how-tos and some of the behind-the-scenes things like that. It was something a little bit like that. So once the park opened itself, there were just all sorts of problems. There were tons of celebrities there. Lots of celebrities were brought in to just be on hand, to cut the ribbons for various rides. A lot of the previews kind of promoted that you'd be able to see, meet, and greet the stars. That really wasn't the case. The people who did see some stars said they were fleeting glimpses. They were kind of being pulled away from the areas or places where guests could watch the celebrity happenings were way far away from where the speeches were being made and the media filming and things like that were being done. So you weren't able to see as many of the celebrities as they promoted. One of the things that opened early in the park, the studio commissary, was supposed to be the elite, the fancy restaurant in the park. And the thought was early on, because of course this was supposed to be a production park too, there was going to be some filming at the park. So the promotion was that guests would be dining there, and who knows, maybe a star would be there, maybe a current star, maybe Arnold Schwarzenegger's filming something at Universal, and maybe he chooses to dine there because the food's so good, and maybe you rub elbows with him. Yeah, of course, none of these stars are really going to go eat in a restaurant with the guests and just possibly be mobbed. That's just not going to work very well. But that was one of the early promotional thoughts. And of course, as we saw in a previous episode of Monorail Monday, Disney-MGM was promoting stars coming to the park. Every couple of days, you could meet a new star. There's going to be a motorcade or something like that. They would get some of these stars to put their handprints in front of the Chinese theater. So there was a lot of hype on the stars. There were a lot of stars at the opening of Universal. Whether or not you actually got to see them was a little sketchier. Steven Spielberg was there, and he was stuck on a Jaws boat for quite a while with his family when the ride broke down. And Jaws broke down a lot early on. Let's talk about some of these stars that were there. Who were there? Michael J. Fox, Steven Spielberg, Charlton Heston, Henry Thomas, D. Wallace Stone, Hanna-Barbera, Jimmy Stewart, Ernest Borgnine, Lorraine Gary helped open the Jaws ride, and oh, this guy was there. He was promoting his new excellent film, Ghost Dad. Remember Ghost Dad? If you do, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Terrible movie. Terrible movie. Because Disney beat Universal to the punch. Once Disney heard that Universal was going to open a movie theme park, they scrambled to open theirs as fast as they could, even in its small and very few attraction state. So Universal sort of backtracked, reset their ideas and their expectations, and decided to focus on building bigger expanded rides and high-tech rides. So all these rides were cutting edge. There was nothing else like them. So when they opened, they just had so many problems. Opening day, Jaws was down most of the day. Kong was down a pretty good chunk of the day. Earthquake went down repeatedly. So that really left the people there to ride the big rides. The big rides are going down. Things ran a little bit better the next day, but still they had a lot of problems. The first day, there were over 1,000 guest complaints. They were handing out refunds to guests, no questions asked. You want a refund? Here you go. And by the second or third day, they decided, okay, just in case some of the stuff is down, let's sort of have a backup plan here. And they were offering free days. So you come, go to the park, you also get a ticket for a free day at a future date. So if any of the big rides weren't working, here's a free day in advance. You can use that anytime and come back and ride those rides. So they were doing a lot of that promotion, at least the first couple of months, maybe as long as the first 6 months that they were doing this promotion to try and get people to come back, or at least come try things out. If a ride wasn't working, you can come back. So there were just lots, and this problem with the rides was much better after the first couple of days. But even when I was working there 3 years later, in 1993, these big rides all still periodically had problems. I think Back to the Future probably was the most reliable of the big attractions when I was there. Future didn't go down very much. Jaws, once it reopened and it was completely redesigned, the boats were redesigned, the sharks were rebuilt, the ride's original design completely changed. I'm going to put a link down here. There is a video online of the original version of Jaws for a training video. I'll put that below. It's really cool. If you've been on what Jaws was from '93 on, you'll remember what that was like. I'll put a link down below for the original version, and it was pretty cool. They had some cool moments. Jaws actually bit onto the boat and dragged the boat around a little bit. And the explosion scene from the end of the movie, the actual Jaws movie, that was in there. Jaws exploded and stuff shot into the air, blood shot into the air, and it was really cool. But those two scenes in particular were super problematic. A lot of the problems stem from those two scenes in the ride. It wasn't that long before the end of the year that they just closed Jaws, so we're going to have to close it and solve the problems. Ultimately, it would not reopen for a couple of years until 1993, and that's when I started working there. Not right when it opened, but shortly after it reopened, and started working there. And we did have some issues with Jaws. We had some problems, not nearly as much as they did when it first opened, but if you've watched some previous episodes of Monorail Monday, you know that there were issues with sharks. You know, one time we ran and operated with only one shark working. So, you know, things happen periodically. I think Confrontation probably was the other one that was down a lot. Sometimes be out in front of Jaws and saying, sorry folks, we're not open. They said, well, Earthquake just went down and Kong just went down. Have you tried Back to the Future over here? So, you know, that became frustrating sometimes. So I can only imagine on opening day dealing with the frustrated crowds that were there, and 3 of the 4 big rides that are open at that time, the big rides, don't work. And even if they did work, you waited forever to get on them. No fast pass or anything like that. Some people were basically just waiting in front because they think an attraction might be opening up soon. So they're all camped out waiting in line to start getting in line immediately should the attraction actually open up. So a lot of issues and stuff going on. So it was a very different place when it opened up, and yet a lot of it's the same, but attractions have all changed so much over the years. Certainly the entrance where the hard rock, guitar-shaped hard rock was, and the parking lots, which basically the parking lots for the original Universal Studios are what is now City Walk and Islands of Adventure. Those little areas were the parking lot for Universal Studios. And another thing is kind of interesting. Disney later adapted to something like this, but this is something that I first encountered working at Universal while I was also working at Disney. But Universal implemented something where they basically gave out a certain number of guest cards to guests entering the park. And they would give them, like, say 2, 3, 4, 5 of these guest cards, like compliment card kind of thing, sort of like you might do with your social media today. And you can, like, Disney will let you can tweet out a guest compliment or something like that. So they would give you a handful of these cards. Not all guests, they would just give random guests a handful of these cards and say, hey, if somebody does something cool for you, if you just feel like you want to reward a team member doing a great job, you give them one of these cards. And then, of course, we could turn those cards in, and they were used like for drawings for prizes, and they would post things like that. It would, of course, get put in your record book. And so very early on, Universal did that, and that was pretty cool. It's pretty cool to get one of these cards and have somebody say, hey, thanks, we really appreciate you, or you were a really great skipper, or we really appreciate your help with getting my disabled son on the ride and keeping us company until we could get on the ride. So those were really neat. And before I left Disney, Disney had started implementing something along those lines as well. And my manager at Jaws always joked and was kind of asking, "What's going on at Disney? What's Disney doing? How do they do things?" Both sides were pretty curious about what the other was doing. But when I told them that Disney had started implementing this thing that was very similar to what Universal is doing, they all had a pretty good laugh and said, "Oh, okay." So they are looking at doing things that we're doing over here, and working at Universal. Before I was at Disney, always very good at helping guests and working with guests, but Universal did a really good job early on in my time there of establishing, empowering the individual team member and saying, you can do something. Don't send them to guest relations to go get something fixed. Walk them over to the hot dog stand or the ice cream stand over at Amity and give this young kid who's having a bad day or something, get the foods person to give them a complimentary ice cream or something like that. And at Disney, it was just pretty much refer them to a supervisor, refer them to City Hall or something like that. Now, Disney's changed a little bit along those lines, but Universal was the first one when I was working at both places that really was pushing that individual, empowerment to people at the rides, at the shops and stuff like that, to do a little more for the guests. So I hope you like this look back at Universal's grand opening, just talking about the very early days, some of the problems that were being dealt with at Universal. We're going to have another episode of Monorail Monday next week, back to some more Disney stories, and should be a lot of fun. So thanks for joining us. Please like, subscribe, share, tell your friends, comment below. Do you have a memory of early Universal? Do you have a question about early Universal or the differences between Disney and Universal? Feel free to comment below. Thanks for joining us. And remember, kids, have a good time all the time.